What up, Ho Biscuits? It's your girl Skitten, back at it again. Going on now like 3 weeks of quarantine. This might be a little bit confusing for y'all because I'm pretty sure I just released a video where I was like, I'm on like day 6 of quarantine. That's because I shot it on day 6 of quarantine, but I didn't release it until like day 16 of quarantine. Anti-hoozin'. I'm on like 3 weeks of quarantine and I think I might die. I never thought I was the kind of person who liked to be out and around people. Apparently I do. I don't like being around people when I have to be around other people, but when you tell me I have to stay home, I'm just like, no. Now I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna talk to all of the people. And it's just like a mess. A freaking mess, I tell you. So anyways, we are here to watch another extra history video by Extra Credits, and we are continuing the series that they had going on about the 1918 flu pandemic. I'll make sure that I put the links to both the original videos and mine and Chavez's reaction to the first one down in the description below. Have y'all noticed that I've actually been doing that when I say I will? Aren't you proud of me? Aren't you happy? I feel like y'all should be happy. Let's get started. 2, 1, play.
It stalked into camp when the day was damp and chilly and cold. It crept by the guards and murdered my pards with a hand that was clammy and bony and bold. And its breath was icy and moldy and dank, and it killed so speedy and gloatingly greedy that it took away men from each company rank. Private Joshua Lee, 34th Infantry Division, 1919.
Joshua Lee, you were a little bit of a poet there, weren't ya? A regular Shakespeare, if you will.
When we left off, the 1918 flu was aboard troop transports headed for the battlefields of France. And though this first wave of the virus was comparatively mild, its time in the trenches would reforge it into a hardened killer of men and help tip the balance of the war.
I like his little eye patch.
In early April,
thing.
it erupted among the American troops at their disembarkation ground in Brest. By April 10th, the first cases began showing up in the French army, which generally trained and served alongside American units. It was hard to notice at first. High fever, headache, and weakness could come from many diseases that swirled around the trenches, such as insect-borne trench fever or typhus. But it soon became clear that this was different. The troops called it 3-day fever, knock-me-down fever, or la grippe. It rarely killed, but men who got it were out of action for days and lead-footed for weeks. The overcrowded camps and trenches of the Western Front were ideal tinder for an epidemic. Men lived within inches of each other, their immune systems compromised from exhaustion and disease. And unlike a city where the virus might run out of victims, here, fresh bodies were rotated onto the line every few days.
Oh, God.
It spread to the British in early May, and by then, there was no hope of containment. It swept through them like a bad spirit. English hospitals saw over 36,000 admissions for flu in a single month.
Jesus.
Only then, when it began undermining the troops' ability to fight, did military doctors raise the alarm. The outbreak had sprung up during a critical phase of the war. The Germans had launched a massive spring offensive, and Allied generals needed every man possible on the line. But as spring turned to summer, the frontline hospitals of the Allies swelled to overcapacity. Men on the front lines would get ready to rotate to the rear, only to find that the unit ordered to relieve them had instead gone into quarantine. Medical tents had run out of space, and some hospitals took to laying patients outside on canvas tarps. In late May, a group of French recruits came.
Y'all can't stay in here. I ain't got no room. Lay on the fucking grass. Like, gives a whole new meaning to like when I'm online and I'm like, yo, go outside, get some fresh air. Like, that was them.
Down with it. 69% of them had to be hospitalized and 5% died. By the end of the summer, 10% of the British Army had fallen ill. Back in Washington, D.C., Welch and his epidemiologists finally took notice. The flu, previously ignored, became a matter of national security. They set about turning the Rockefeller Institute into an information gathering and communications center for the disease. Welch wanted anything he could get his hands on. Reports, lung samples, information on treatment, so he dispatched doctors to centers of infection to swab throats and collect samples. But all of it remained a closely guarded secret. No one wanted the Central Powers to know that the Allies were being weakened by disease.
Right.
Upon entering the war, both the US and Britain had clamped down on the press with unprecedented censorship measures. When American officers denied or minimized reports of the flu, newspapers at home accepted it without question. The British, for their part, tried to strangle any mention of the spreading plague. But with the virus now infecting the civilian population, news of an epidemic started to leak. In May, the virus...
Which, like, I understand why you wouldn't want, like, news to spread of this, but at the same time, like, you're endangering your populace. So it's just so interesting to me, like, that we find ourselves in a similar situation here where, like, we're not getting all of the information that we need. We're not being told, like, the real numbers. Like, we're not being told, you know, the details of what's going on with the Rona. Apparently people are mad that Chavez and I are calling it the Rona, and to those people I say gag. But like, lack of information literally kills people. Lack of resources literally kills people. And it's not worth it to do that just to, like, I know it's more than saving face, but really at the end of the day, it's just to save face.
There, the flu made front page news, especially once it infected the king.
Oh shit.
It whipped through Spanish cities, passing from person to person so fast that local wits named it after a hit opera song, The Naples Soldier. It was as catchy as the song, the joke went, if more deadly. International newspapers picked up the story on the Madrid outbreak and, erroneously, assumed the disease had originated there. And from those articles, the killer gained another name,
Spanish
the
influenza.
Spanish flu.
Yep.
But it wasn't just the Allies covering up the flu's impact. On the other side of no man's land, the German commander, General Ludendorff, was also wrestling with the disease. Ludendorff had gained day-to-day command of the German military in 1916, along with a huge amount of political power, and he'd used it to embark on a bold plan to save the Kaiser and Germany. And to be honest, it hadn't gone so well. First, he'd planned to crush the Allied supply lines with unrestricted submarine warfare. Instead, it had helped drag America into the conflict. Now, 84,000 Americans were arriving on the Western Front each month. But that would be a surmountable problem if he could knock Russia out of the war and free up the troops fighting on the Eastern Front.
Okay, that
Luckily
surely
for
must
him,
succeed.
a revolution had broken out against the Tsar. And to fuel the chaos, he helped transport a famous Bolshevik revolutionary, one Vladimir Lenin, back to Russia.
Oh, wow.
The plan worked. Kinda. Ludendorff had hoped the strict peace terms he'd foisted on Russia would scare other allies into opening negotiations. But instead, the harsh treaty only had convinced them that peace was not possible until they achieved total victory, and forced an equally punishing treaty on Germany. But at least Ludendorff now had his 50 divisions from the Eastern Front, and he'd use them for one more, all-or-nothing shot at winning the war. He'd retrained the freed-up veterans as assault specialists, stormtroopers, and launched his massive spring offensive in hopes of securing victory before the Americans arrived in force.
Please, God.
As the offensive began, Ludendorff's army had better trained troops, superior tactics, higher morale, and for a brief time, numerical superiority. And at the beginning, it all went so well. German troops had captured more territory than they had since 1914 and driven a wedge between the British and the French. But the Allies had held on to the strategic port roads and railroad junctions. All the ground that Ludendorff captured was worthless, shell-churned dirt. And they'd taken a lot of casualties. So the next phase of the operation was critical. But as he began to organize for a final push, his generals requested a delay. The German army, you see, had the flu. They caught it in June, probably from a British prisoner of war, and by July it was sweeping the ranks. German troops, their systems already weak from food rationing, appeared especially susceptible to infection. 500,000 soldiers were sick. In some units, a quarter of the men were too ill to fight. Ludendorff delayed the attack 5 days. After that, the commanders would just have to deal with the reduced unit strength. Meanwhile, the Allies, who had caught the flu earlier in the spring and summer, were recovering. Despite sickness, exhaustion, and casualty depletion, on July 15th, the German army marshaled for their one last attack. A rolling bombardment pounded the French and American lines as they advanced. Stormtroopers rushed behind with fast-moving infiltration tactics. Gas shells turned the battlefield into a chemical hell. But the French, British, and Americans held and counterattacked. And they would keep counterattacking for 100 days, pushing the Germans back step by step. Ludendorff had failed. Within weeks, he was shut in his office, suffering a nervous breakdown. And by October, he was fleeing across the Swedish border in sunglasses and a fake beard. Now, it would be wrong to say the flu defeated Ludendorff's spring offensive because there were other factors. It was an overambitious operation with a nebulous goal. He kept changing the objectives, units outran their supply lines, and he lost too many men. But German accounts do suggest the flu bled the army's manpower and resolve at a critical moment.
Damn.
And just as it had tipped the balance, it was gone. In August, British hospitalizations fell to the point that they had declared the epidemic over. But it wasn't over. For as the balance of the war was shifting, so were the virus's genes.
Oh my god.
Even today,
look at him, he's so cute though. His little eye patch, his little scar, his little teethy teeth. He's so cute.
no one's sure what happened. Perhaps the original, deadly virus had temporarily mutated into a mild strain, only to have its lethality re-emerge. Or it may have infected someone, even an animal, that had a different version of the flu and the two viruses combined. It's even possible that, as it passed through millions of soldiers, this avian virus was gradually adapting itself to human hosts.
That's awful.
Most frightening of all, the war itself may have given it a nudge, because the soldiers the flu infected had been exposed to a chemical agent known to cause genetic mutation.
Oh,
mustard gas.
fuck,
The soldiers' throat and lung cells laced with chemical weapons may have helped increase the rate of genetic shift and raise the likelihood that a new strain would develop. However it happened,
That's
the virus
so
that emerged from the
unfortunate.
trenches was both highly contagious and severely lethal. It could kill within 24 hours of presenting symptoms, drowning a patient in their own fluids.
Oh,
And while
Jesus.
common flu strains primarily kill the very old and very young, the 1918 flu struck people down in the prime of life.
Sounds fucking familiar.
The mild first wave was over, and the second lethal wave was about to begin. In fact, it was already making itself known on the troop ships delivering soldiers to nations across the globe.
Wow.
The Naples soldier was on the march.
That's so tragic. I'm really interested to see like how this story continues and wraps up. Like I said earlier, I will make sure that I put the link to the original videos and mine and my husband's first reaction down in the description below. And other than that, peace out, Ho Biscuits. It's getting lit.